Hi, I'm Tanner Harding, and this is my senior capstone on the psychology of serial killers. So today we're gonna discuss a few different things in terms of serial killers. So we're gonna look at their childhood, profiling and statistics, motivations, treatment, some discrepancies between the FBI, local law enforcement, psychologists, and the media, and then kind of an outlook on what the future holds for serial killers and the psychology of serial killers. So I chose this topic of serial killers because serial killers have always interested me. I've always been kind of fascinated with them. Was always a big fan of those shows like Law and Order, movies like Silence of the Lambs, things like that. And I want to go into law enforcement, so I kind of think those two go hand in hand. So that's why I chose serial killers as my topic. So what do you think of when you hear the word serial killer? Murders, maybe Ted Bundy, the movie Silence of the Lambs. It's just such a popular genre with all of like the thriller movies. Halloween kind of glorifies that stuff. But so why is it so fascinating to people? And I think it's just kind of that eerie feeling you get is just kind of really interesting to people. All right, so let's get right into childhood. A serial killer's childhood can provide insight on how they developed into the person they are. Trauma can have devastating outcomes on an undeveloped brain, which we all know as psychology majors. Many serial killers fall victim to undiagnosed and untreated trauma that stems back into their childhood. We have found that the strongest contributors to that are neglect and abuse. Others could include violence, such as maybe beating, they see beating or they were beat, sexual abuse and sexual violence, and even verbal violence can have devastating effects. And childhood traumas are often overlooked by the media and the public when discussing serial killers. People tend to not care about their past, and that kind of made them the way they are, and people often overlook that. So if these traumas can be properly dealt with in a serial killer's childhood, then there would be a lot less serial killers than there are today. And we know that trauma follows you into adulthood. And just to kind of touch on that trauma and in your childhood, especially now, with everybody being home during this lockdown, the domestic violence rates they're skyrocketing. Everyone's home. People are getting in more fights. So children now are being exposed to more trauma, such as that abuse, even neglect. Maybe the parent is working on their home or their work all day, and they kind of neglect that child. So it'll be interesting to see the kind of effects that this lockdown has had in terms of like serial killers and things like that in like the near future, maybe like 20 years down the road or something like that. So let's get into profiling statistics. To profile a serial killer is difficult. There's no one-size-fits-all profile of a serial killer. Maybe so many different ethnicities, ages, races, things like that are serial killers, so it's hard to fit that one-size-fits-all. Talk about the definition of a serial killer kind of helps us wrap our minds around a little bit more, get a better idea of it. So a psychology definition of serial killer is 3 or more murders, 3 or more separate events, a cooling off period, and a motive. Their motive. A lot of that is missed. People don't think they have a motive, but a lot of them do. Kind of a little bit of a discrepancy between some people believe that mass murders and serial killers are the same, and they're different. Their motivations, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So the two do not go hand in hand. We can begin to categorize a crime scene just kind of based on what's left there, and that kind of can help us categorize serial killers, understand them a little bit more. So if the crime scene is messy, there's evidence of a mistake, if DNA has been left behind, that is categorized as a disorganized killer. And that's just the very basic general beginning of categorizing serial killers. Then on the other hand, if it's clean, there's no evidence left behind, or there's no DNA left behind, we can categorize that crime scene, begin to categorize that as a organized killer. So profiling statistics, a little bit more on this. Organized killers are cautious and can sweet talk their way out of situations. A really good example of this is in the Netflix series, The Ted Bundy, The Confession Tapes, that really portrays this organized killer really accurately on his way to, he's really cautious, can sweet talk his way out of like law enforcement, like getting pulled over so many times. So that's a really good example of that. Some more common assumptions of serial killers are people believe that they're white males in their 20s. It's actually false. White males in their 20s only account for 18.2% of all serial killers. And I thought that was really interesting. People also believe that not very many black people carry out they are serial killers. And in fact, 20.4% of all serial killers are African American. Some people don't take that into account. Like a lot of that is connected with gangs and things like that. The killing to get initiated and the continued killing, cooling off period, and the motive all fit the definition of a serial killer. And another one is that all serial killers are men. And actually, this is false. Nearly 20% of serial killers are women. So again, this kind of falls right into how difficult it is to come up with a profile for a serial killer. A couple interesting stats on IQ. People believe that like serial killers have high IQs, like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer had high IQs, when in fact average IQ for a serial killer is 103, which is pretty average. And some more information that could be related to IQ, as if the serial killer raped their victim or not. And if they rape their victim, on average their IQ is 98.6, so it's slightly below the average IQ. And if they did not rape their victim, they're slightly above average at a 107.2. And then back to the disorganized and organized crime scene. An organized crime scene, as you could probably assume, is a little bit higher average IQ. It's 123.2. And if it's disorganized, it's a 93.5. So main takeaways from the whole profiling is that there's no profile, there's no generic profile, which in turn makes it harder for law enforcement to maybe track down and catch these serial killers. Some commonalities we can find in serial killers that they share are a need for control, they're sensation seeking, they have a lack of remorse for their victims, impulsivity, and predatory behavior. These are kind of what differs a serial killer from a mass murderer, or even like a spree killer who just goes on like a rampage, that are just kind of acting out of hate or revenge on a person, whereas a serial killer just has that lack of remorse. They always find that need for control. They're looking for that sensation that they get out of the killings, and they're really impulsive. We'll talk about the impulsive side of that a little bit more later. So all of this kind of connects us into the motivations. So although all serial killers are killers, they vary greatly. There's 5 different categories of motivations that a serial killer can fall into. That's visionary, mission-oriented, hedonistic, control, and predator. So let's kind of go into start from the beginning and work towards the end here. So visionary, these kind of serial killers revolve around delusions such as like auditory, so they're hearing that someone is directing them to kill. So that's an example of a visionary serial killer. A missionary serial killer is on a mission, basically. So they want to kill as many people as they can that they view evil. And a really good example of this is in the Netflix show Dexter. So Dexter considered a serial killer, and he goes around killing other people in the where they live that are like bad, that he considers bad, like other killers, things like that. So Dexter, that's a really good example if you could connect those two. So a hedonistic killer, these kind of killers find thrill or satisfaction in their killings. This is kind of the worst kind of a killer. That's really scary to think about. Someone like finds a little thrill or satisfaction from it. Control killers, they seek to attain a power trip from their actions. So a lot of that is seen. They either have this or maybe a little bit of both. You can see that in like serial killers who rape their victims or sexually assault them. They want that control aspect that gives them that the power trip. Predator killers, they view killing as a game, almost like hunting. So those are some of the 5 of some of the motivations. There's others that are out there that are going to continue to be studied, that are going to come out. Kind of depends on what information you take from. Some people say there's more, some people say there's less. But like I said, killers, a lot of them can be motivated through sexual actions, which people think that's a separate thing. So that primarily means rape is involved before or after the murder. And it tends to be sexually motivated killers tend to be what a lot of the media portrays, not necessarily media, but like movies and books and things like that. Like Law and Order SVU shows a lot of that. So people maybe have a misguided idea that there's way more of those than others. So these, like I said, these are only like a few of the motivations that a killer may possess. There could be many more. So let's talk about treatment. So treatment of a serial killer. Many people believe that a serial killer acts the way they do because they have a personality disorder. So definition of personality disorder is a persistent pattern of emotions and behaviors that cause difficulty in maintaining work or personal relationship. So it affects their day-to-day life, obviously in a major way. And there's 3 clusters when discussing personality disorders. There's cluster A, B, and C. The one cluster that we'll be focusing on is cluster B. So cluster B is often thought of in terms of serial killers because those that suffer from personality disorders under cluster B are often emotional, dramatic, or unstable. Like those are words that can easily be described and related to serial killers. Definitely emotional, dramatic in their actions, and they're unstable. A lot of instability in their life. Goes back to their childhood, and we'll discuss that here in a little bit. So the 2 personality disorders that we're going to focus on under cluster B are borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. So borderline personality disorder, this is a definition is a pattern of instability with relationships and inability to control impulses. So they have that impulse to kill, they can't control it. An antisocial personality disorder, these are individuals who disregard the rights of others. So they don't care about anybody, they don't care about their victims, they don't care about their feelings, their family, they don't care. So that instability, like we talked about earlier, that falls into that cluster B. These both are really main drivers of that unstable trait, which is why many people associate serial killers with these disorders. So, on the other hand, studies show that there are actually very few serial killers that suffer from personality disorders. So, those who do suffer, for treatment for them is really difficult because these are typically lifelong. You're not going to be able to treat these because they're just they've affected their processes so much that they're unwilling and unable to get treatment, which makes it even more problematic. The best way to really prevent these psychological disorders are to prevent them from happening in the first place. Sounds counterintuitive, right? But basically, prevention is the key. So detecting some of these early indicators in their childhood is a good start for this. So preventing overly aggressive actions in children seem to be the best way to prevent the personality disorder. Many killers can trace back to their childhood as being overly aggressive. That's how they were described as children. That early aggression is essential to be acted on. Continued research may be possible with continued legislative support for funding for rehabilitation programs, especially for those maybe who don't suffer from personality disorders, who maybe are incarcerated, maybe getting them more help and advocating for more help for them in prison, and maybe, releasing some of them, and if they are rehabilitated, and releasing them back into society is a good start for treatment for them. And that'll be looked at here more in the future as the mental health becomes more common. Positive mental health is more accepted in society. You'll see more of that. So I want to talk about a few discrepancies between the media, FBI, so the top of the chain for law enforcement, local law enforcement, and psychologists. So psychology, we base our information around empirical data that's backed by science, and maybe local law enforcement or the media don't really accept that, and they just kind of put whatever they think will get more ratings and things like that. So if we can kind of bring everybody together, have one general definition and a more understanding on the indicators for this, we can all work together, and that'll prevent more serial killers from becoming serial killers. So law enforcement heavily relies on case studies, which can really differ depending on the area. So if East Coast, West Coast, northern states, southern states, rural, popular, like New York, San Francisco, things like that. Like I said, if they come together, we'll gather more accurate information. Oftentimes, the FBI and the media misuse information. So they may say that a killer or somebody is a serial killer when they actually aren't by definition, or they may say that they suffer from mental health disorder when they haven't even been seen by psychologists yet, so they can't even be properly diagnosed, but they already diagnosed them as that. So society believes that they have it when they actually don't. And a good kind of, I don't know if everybody's seen Mindhunter on Netflix. This kind of talks about the beginning of that psychological integrating that into the FBI, and that to continue that needs to be more in the local law enforcement, things like that, not just those higher ups like in those federal level. That needs to be normalized more for the local level too. Just like local law enforcement having that maybe a little bit of psychology background, like what I want to do. So more people like that would be very helpful because we're aware of this. So the issues with all of that is that the public is misinformed on information, which leads to more confusion. The media will blast every move of a serial killer when it gives them the attention and fame that they crave. So if we could take that attention and that thrill, maybe that notoriety that they're seeing on TV every night, take that away from them, maybe in the future there'd be less killings because they're not getting that same like kind of high from it. So we take that away from them. The media glorifies the killings, maybe has a copycat killers, things like that. So basically we just need the media, local law enforcement, FBI, and psychologists to all work together to help limit this. So looking at an outlook, issues with stopping people from becoming serial killers like it in their childhood is that it has to be detected at a young age. And a lot of these people that are becoming serial killers, we look back and they don't have a good home life. These children often live in less fortunate living conditions, live in poverty. They have no support at home. Maybe they live in a group home, maybe, and where they have no, they don't really have that love like a good home could give them. So obviously they're going to have negative outcomes. They lack the financial stability to pay for counseling that they may need. So obviously that's going to equal negative outcomes on their psychological development. So the very thing that is needed to prevent them becoming a serial killer and having all those negative outcomes is missing. So what can we do? Have more mental health professionals in schools that can help children because their parents or guardians are unwilling or unable to do. the public being more educated on the importance of the positive mental health, more funding so that that's able to be implemented into schools. Hopefully with the new generations like us right now that are aware and educated on the importance of positive mental health, then maybe these numbers we could see go down because they'll have that love and care that we understand and the positive mental health that they need. And continuing the normalization of mental health. Like I said, all this kind of boils down to this little, like, close it up here. So understanding the psychology of a serial killer is essential in protecting society and preventing the development of future serial killers. That's all I got for you guys. Thanks for watching.